Most people assume that soldiers in the Second World War survived winter through brute endurance, heavy wool, and whatever stoves their supply lines could deliver, but the reality is more revealing and, honestly, more unsettling. In many sectors of the war, heating was not simply scarce. It was actively restricted, discouraged, or at times considered tactically dangerous. Fire gave away position. Smoke revealed movement. Fuel had to be hauled across collapsing infrastructure. Even when armies possessed heating methods that worked, they often chose not to use them. What emerged in that gap between necessity and restraint was a body of knowledge that, well, rarely made it into official doctrine. Field manuals mentioned some of it quietly. Engineers experimented with more of it. Individual soldiers improvised constantly. Yet many of the most effective low-fuel heating solutions were never standardized, never distributed widely, and, honestly, sometimes deliberately ignored because they required time, discipline, or technical understanding that wartime command structures just could not guarantee. Today, stripped of military constraints, several of those overlooked methods remain remarkably effective, especially where power is unavailable and fuel is limited. They are not dramatic inventions. They are slow, methodical solutions shaped by people who understood that warmth is not created only by fire, but by controlling how heat is lost. And that distinction really defined survival in the coldest theaters of the war. One of the most reliable wartime heat sources came from the ground itself, yet armies rarely trained soldiers to use it properly. Frozen landscapes feel hostile, but beneath even shallow frost, the earth maintains a more stable temperature than open air. Military engineers understood this well. In Eastern Front sectors, reconnaissance units occasionally dug shallow sleeping depressions or modified foxholes specifically to exploit subsurface warmth. The temperature difference was often modest, just a few degrees, but in sustained cold exposure, small margins determined survival. What prevented widespread adoption was time. Digging required labor, and exhausted troops prioritized concealment or fortification instead. Many also misunderstood soil insulation, assuming frozen ground conducted cold downward rather than buffering it. In reality, layering organic material, pine boughs, straw, even scrap fabric, over shallow excavations could create surprisingly effective thermal barriers. Modern survival instruction recognizes ground insulation as fundamental, but wartime experience showed something more subtle. The earth does not merely block cold, it stabilizes temperature fluctuations. In an environment where night temperatures plunge rapidly, stability matters more than peak warmth. One of the most reliable wartime heat sources came from the ground itself, yet armies rarely trained soldiers to use it properly. Armies experimented with chemical heat generation, but most soldiers never learned how to produce it safely in the field. Quicklime, when exposed to water, produces a strong exothermic reaction. Military engineers used this principle in controlled settings for warming rations and preventing equipment freeze, but outside specialized units, knowledge of chemical heating remained limited. Part of the hesitation was logistical. Quicklime had industrial value and was not always distributed in forms suitable for field handling. More importantly, the reaction required careful containment. Improvised heating vessels could crack, leak, or release caustic residue. In chaotic winter conditions, that risk often outweighed perceived benefit. Yet when properly managed, chemical heat required no flame, produced no smoke, and functioned regardless of wind or oxygen levels. For soldiers needing warmth without detection, it offered clear advantages. After the war, similar principles quietly influenced civilian self-heating rations and portable heating packs. The lesson is not that chemical heating is universally practical, but that heat does not always require combustion. Controlled reactions can provide targeted warmth where fire would be dangerous or impossible. Some of the most effective warmth came from trapped body heat, but maintaining it required discipline few units could enforce. Human bodies produce constant thermal energy. In enclosed environments, that energy accumulates quickly if it is not allowed to escape. Several winter warfare studies conducted late in the war examined small group shelters designed specifically to capture and recycle metabolic heat. These shelters relied on tight volume control, layered insulation, and controlled ventilation. When constructed correctly, interior temperatures could rise significantly above ambient conditions with no external heat source at all. But such systems demanded strict behavioral compliance. Open flaps, unnecessary movement, or poorly sealed seams dissipated accumulated warmth rapidly. In frontline environments where men entered and exited frequently, consistency proved impossible. Modern survivalists often rediscover what wartime engineers already observed. Insulation is not passive. It requires management. Heat retention depends less on materials than on how consistently barriers are maintained. Improvised candle heaters existed, but their true effectiveness depended on thermal mass rather than flame size. Small flame devices were common throughout the war. Simple wick lamps, ration fuel burners, trench candles, but their heating capacity alone was limited. The innovation came when soldiers began enclosing these flames within heavy containers. Metal tins, stacked stones, even mud-coated shell casings. The flame heated the mass slowly. The mass then radiated heat steadily long after the flame weakened. This transformed fragile, flickering heat into sustained warmth. Military supply chains rarely formalized this technique because it appeared inefficient. Fuel burned slowly and did not produce immediate temperature rise. But over time, thermal mass systems provided more stable heating with less fuel consumption. Modern off-grid heating often relies on the same principle. The fire is not the heater, the material absorbing the fire is. Snow shelters preserved heat more effectively than many built structures, yet they were widely misunderstood by non-specialist troops. Snow is an excellent insulator because it traps air within its crystalline structure. Properly constructed snow shelters maintain interior temperatures far above outside air, even without fire. Specialized units trained in winter warfare understood this. Many conventional infantry did not. Some troops refused to build snow shelters at all, believing direct exposure to frozen material would accelerate heat loss. Others constructed shelters too large, allowing internal warmth to dissipate. Ventilation was also poorly understood. Inadequate airflow created moisture accumulation that reduced insulation effectiveness. Where training existed, results were consistent. Smaller, denser, carefully shaped snow shelters conserved heat more reliably than many canvas tents exposed to wind. The lesson is architectural, not environmental. Shelter shape determines heat behavior as much as insulation quality. Stored heat in water containers provided quiet, controlled warmth, but the method spread slowly through military ranks. Water holds thermal energy efficiently. Heated once, it releases warmth gradually over extended periods. Some forward medical stations and communications posts used heated water containers as passive heat sources inside insulated enclosures. For mobile troops, however, the practice remained uncommon. Heating water required fuel expenditure up front, and the benefit was delayed. Commanders often prioritized immediate warmth rather than sustained release. Yet for stationary survival, overnight sheltering, equipment protection, frost prevention, water heat storage proved highly reliable. Unlike open flame, it posed minimal fire risk and produced no visible signature. Modern survival systems frequently rediscover thermal storage because it solves a fundamental wartime problem: how to maintain warmth after fuel is gone. These methods share a common thread. None rely on abundant energy. None depend on advanced technology. All require patience, structure, and understanding of heat behavior rather than attempts to overpower cold through combustion alone. During the Second World War, armies prioritized speed, mobility, and tactical concealment. Heating systems that demanded careful setup, monitoring, or training often remained underused. But the conditions that made them impractical for large military formations are precisely what make them valuable for individuals today. Limited fuel, restricted movement, need for concealment, unreliable infrastructure, those are not uniquely wartime problems. They are recurring features of any environment where power fails and supply chains fracture. What the war revealed, quietly, often unintentionally, is that survival in extreme cold is less about generating heat and more about controlling its flow. The soldiers who understood this survived not because they endured more suffering, but because they reduced the amount of warmth they needed to produce in the first place. That is a subtle lesson, and one that rarely appears in popular accounts of wartime endurance. But it is one that remains profoundly relevant wherever people must live, wait, or persist without reliable energy. Remembering these overlooked practices matters because they show us how knowledge disappears when conditions change. What was once improvised necessity becomes forgotten technique. What was once dismissed as inefficient becomes essential when resources vanish. If you value careful, grounded historical analysis and the survival knowledge hidden within it, subscribe to Logistics of Survival and share this video with others who believe history still has practical lessons to teach.